About a month ago, I made a video essay in which I unironically defended Tommy Wiseau's The Room. The argument that I made, and that I continue to believe, is that no individual filmmaking choice can be inherently good or bad, and therefore the things that supposedly make The Room bad are actually things that help it succeed if you watch it as a comedy, which I think most of us do. So before I can talk about how obviously bad the Kissing Booth movies are, I kind of have to dig myself out of this hole that I just got myself into, right? Like, how can I possibly criticize anything after defending a movie like The Room? To answer this, I'm going to have to get you caught up on my new and improved Boric theory of genre, and I'm going to coin a few terms because it makes me feel smart. Imagine for a moment a hypothetical movie. Now, this movie, like every movie, would have what I call an aspirational genre. That's the genre that it tries to mimic, that, or at least that it appears to try to mimic. And good movies generally are going to succeed in being a good example of their aspirational genre, right? Like a good horror movie will scare you, a good drama will make you emotional. But now let's say that our hypothetical film doesn't do a good job at the thing it seems like it's trying to do. Well, it's not over yet, because there is one genre that isn't really an aspirational genre at all, that our movie, our hypothetical movie, can still succeed in. And that genre is what I'm going to call reflexive comedy. Consider also that there are two kinds of comedy, and this is true not just in film, but in general. And I'm going to call them subject comedy and reflexive comedy. Now, subject comedy is by far the dominant medium. It's the comedy of the subject. The thing being portrayed in the show or movie or whatever is the thing that you're laughing at. Whereas reflexive comedy is a little bit different. In reflexive comedy, you're laughing at the way it's being told. So, for instance, your teacher who makes a bunch of jokes in class and makes you laugh with them, that's subject comedy. But your other teacher who is unintentionally funny and who you laugh at behind their back, that's reflexive comedy. In subject comedy, you laugh with the movie, and in reflexive comedy, you laugh at the movie. I got these terms from subject and reflexive pronouns, subject pronouns being me, her, him, etc., and reflexive pronouns being myself, himself, herself. Reflexive comedy is the movie inviting you to laugh at itself, whether it's intentional or not. So our hypothetical film, which failed to be whatever genre it seemed to be in, still has a chance if it can make us laugh through its failure. Now, most of the time this doesn't happen. Most bad movies are just bad. But every once in a while we'll get a The Room, or a Birdemic, or a Troll 2. Movies that were almost bad, but ended up being great instead. So that's my genre theory. Now I'm gonna talk shit about The Kissing Booth. The Kissing Booth is about a teenage girl named Elle. Elle is short for Shelley, and Shelley is short for Rochelle. She goes by a nickname of a nickname, and like each name is sort of introduced at a different time in the movie, and it's like, wait, that's also her name? Like, how long has that been her name? That's not my point. Exposition can be hard to do. I get that. A lot of times in movies, there's going to be some information that the audience needs to know, but that is not really going to come up naturally in characters talking to each other, and that there's not really a good way to explain to the audience without being really obvious. So I try not to hold it against movies too much when they use exposition, at least where necessary. Like take Inception. Now, I have some other issues with the dialogue in Inception.
You're waiting for a train.
But the exposition is not a big flaw for me because at the end of the day, Inception is a pretty high concept movie, and I do need to be told what the fuck is happening. The Kissing Booth opens with Elle narrating over a montage of basically her entire life up until the start of the movie. Now, a lot of teen movies open with minimal narration or montage, so I'd be willing to let it slide as long as this is all information that we need to know and that couldn't really have been told to us naturally any other way. So, let's check. The first piece of information is that she was born at the exact same time as her best friend Lee. This is not important information. I can see how it maybe would be important if there was like a supernatural thing going on and her and Lee were like destined to be together or something. But the movie, as of the end of The Kissing Booth 2, does not go down that road. They don't even really have any romantic tension between them. So I don't really see why we're being told this. There's also this brief moment where ice cream and forgiveness happens between them, and this does come back later in the movie. So you might be thinking, oh, well, there, it's foreshadowing. That's why it's there. We needed to know that. But the problem is that the time when it comes back, like, it's a scene that doesn't need to exist. The scene doesn't do anything. It's less that this is setting up that other scene, and more that that scene is a callback to the opening monologue, which means that this entire whole thing with ice cream could have easily been omitted, and the movie would not suffer for it. Next, we learn that Noah, Lee's brother, is a bit of a bully, but he cares about Elle and Lee. And we do learn that in the actual movie, so we don't really need to be told it. But we also learn that Elle has a crush on Noah, and has for some time. And this is the first piece of information that I think actually is acceptable for it to be given to us in this form. We do need to know it, and there isn't a totally natural way for it to be brought up. We also learn that she isn't fashionable, and that she is good at sports. This literally never comes up again. It actually does not ever come up in the movie another time. I don't know why we're told it. Next, we learn that her mom is dead, that her mom died when she was, 11 or 12 or something. Now you're thinking, okay, surely this is important information that had to be delivered to us in this way, right? And shockingly, it actually isn't. While her dead mom is mentioned a few times in the movie, it never affects anything. It doesn't affect anything about her personality. It doesn't affect anything about her values or about her at all. It never affects the plot in any way. The movie basically just gave her a dead mom because they figured, oh, like, we feel bad for her if she has a dead mom, and that way we'll like her and she'll be a good protagonist. Except that any screenwriter knows, or should know, that we have to like a character before we feel bad for them, not the other way around. This is actually a pretty common trope in recent bad teen movies. It happened in To All the Boys I've Loved Before, and it happened in the half of it, and to my memory, it did not affect anything about either movie. And finally, we learn that despite being in her junior year of high school, she hasn't had her first kiss yet. And this brings me to the closest that either of these movies gets to being good. See, one good way to build characters is to build them around the story. So take Jaws, for instance, right? Jaws is a story about a guy who has to hunt down a shark. Now, this story would be passable, I guess, but when you're designing the protagonist, it might make sense to do what Jaws did, which is to make him afraid of the water. This adds a lot of interesting conflict to it. The protagonist and the story fundamentally match each other in this really nice way that drives the movie forward. The Kissing Booth doesn't totally do that. Well, okay, the Kissing Booth just doesn't do that at all. Sure, it's like vaguely ironic that Elle is running a kissing booth despite the fact that she's never been kissed, but this doesn't add anything to the story. No conflict becomes of that. It's just like a throwaway joke at one point in the movie. But then there's another way to design characters. If you have a movie that's about two people, you can design the characters around each other. Take Heathers, for instance, which is, in my opinion, the best American teen movie ever made. We have the character of Veronica and the character of J.D., and they're built for each other. There are ways in which they're very similar. Both are smart and more than a little bit pretentious. They're both attractive, and they both have a very strong sense of justice. But then there are ways in which they're starkly different. This is what drives the conflict of the movie, this push and pull between their similarities and their differences. For instance, J.D. has a chaotic family while Veronica's is stable and almost boring. Veronica is popular while J.D. is an outcast, and most importantly, J.D. is reckless where Veronica is careful. The result of this very meticulous character design is a movie where it is fascinating to see these two characters push and pull against each other. Contrast this to The Kissing Booth, where the fundamental relationship is a romantic one between Elle and Noah. Now here's where I'm going to give the first movie a little bit of credit. And that's that the fact that Elle has never been kissed and the fact that Noah fucks on the daily, which he does, actually kind of creates some tension. In the first movie, Elle gets a little bit offended when Noah takes him to a spot that he's taken girls before, but particularly in the second movie, Elle suspects that Noah's cheating on her in no uncertain terms, partly because of his history of dating a lot of women. And it's like, yes, this is a kind of tension that could only exist between, for lack of nicer terms, a prude and a player. The personality differences between two characters is causing tension. The problem is that's pretty much where it ends. Beyond that, Elle and Lee don't have any personality, and what little personality Noah has is almost contradictory to how we're supposed to feel about him, and doesn't create any tension, even though his violent tendency easily could. But for some reason, the movie just, like, never really capitalizes on it. The first movie also has the unfortunate issue of sexualizing its main character, like, a lot. Now, Joey King was 18 at the time of filming, but her character is only 16, and the movie seems like, at times, actively built around finding ways to get her to be in her underwear, so I don't know, it's kind of weird. And as if that weren't enough, here are some other things that happen in the first film. Noah, the romantic love interest of the story who Elle ends up with, tells Elle after her sexual assault that she was asking for it. And I'm not paraphrasing there.
Wearing a skirt like that is asking for it.
About 5 minutes later, Elle ends up agreeing to go out on a date with her assaulter. And you're like, why, right? Well, it's because he passed her a note during class that simply read, "I'm sorry," which reminds me of Roderick's incredible apology in Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick Rules, to women that simply read,
"I'm sorry, women."
Except somehow Roderick's apology is actually better than his. But don't worry, she doesn't end up going out on the date because the guy never shows up. And the reason the guy never shows up is because Noah, again, the hot romantic that Elle ends up in a relationship with, he is actually controlling her dating life by forbidding anyone from going out with her, which, if you were wondering, is, in fact, one of the 15 warning signs listed on the National Domestic Abuse Hotline website. And of course, there's the titular kissing booth, which is a system in which any high school student can pay another high school student to kiss a third high school student, and the third high school student doesn't ever know who they're kissing. And these are children at a school-approved thing, but of course the kissing booth was made during the era of third-wave feminism, so it can't simply admit to being problematic. So here's where we get into tokenism. Now, the OMGs have their token sassy black friend, who has a total of probably 5 lines in both movies, which is somehow still not the most offensive thing about the OMGs, because the most offensive thing about the OMGs is that everyone, including the movie, calls them the OMGs, which is just... But while generally less problematic than the first, the Kissing Booth 2 probably has the worst example of tokenism I've honestly ever seen in a movie, and that is the gay couple. Now, about halfway through the second movie, Elle is on the beach for, like, California reasons. They live in California, if you didn't know. And she starts talking to this guy named Ollie. And Ollie is all like, "I am a homosexual man. I am sexually attracted to Miles." And Elle is all like, "Go off, King. We stan. I ship it. Get yours, sweetie." I'm paraphrasing here. Essentially, that's when we meet this character. An hour into the second movie. 1 hour in. Now, I was thinking, maybe I've met this guy before and I just didn't remember it. So I looked it up, and it turns out that I actually had. Now, according to reputable source CBR.com, Ollie and Miles were, quote, giving each other cute, not-so-subtle stares back in the first movie. Now, I have no memory of this, but sure, I believe it. I didn't process everything from the first movie. Later in the movie, Ollie and Miles are at a costume party, and Miles almost asks Ollie out, but then sort of gets dragged away by his friends at the last minute. And at the very end of the movie, at the kissing booth, Miles and Ollie hook up, and it's like, hooray, happy ending. Now, if you haven't seen this movie, if you're lucky like that, you might be wondering, like, well, what are their personalities? You know, why are they attracted to each other? What's the conflict with them? And the answer is, you clearly haven't been paying attention to this video. They don't have any personality. They're just gay. That's it. That's literally it. The only reason they exist in this movie is so the movie can say it has a gay couple and come off as woke and progressive. Other than that, they are literally entirely irrelevant to the movie. And if you don't believe me, I looked at the Wikipedia article for The Kissing Booth 2. Now, the Wikipedia article contains a 745-word plot summary of the movie. They are not mentioned. They are not in the article because they don't matter to the movie. They are just the token gay couple. This is tokenism to the extreme. Elle may as well have turned to the camera and said, "gay rights." This is going to be a pretty short section because it's kind of hard to talk at length about how badly shot a movie is. I think it's better to just give you some of my favorite examples. This brilliant series of over-the-shoulders, because of the height difference, actually ends up being an around-the-arm shot and a over-the-head shot. This shot, reverse shot on the Ferris wheel, has both characters on the same left side of the frame for absolutely no reason, which isn't technically a rule break, but, like, it looks weird, and you have to have a purpose with doing that if you're gonna do it, and this movie just, doesn't, of course, because there aren't real artists involved here. And of course, there are these shots where the camera just kind of spins around the characters really fast. And I said it in Lost, and I'll say it again, you cannot just spin around the characters and call it cinematography. Okay, so first of all, this movie just won't shut up about California. That's why I'm dressed like this. That's the gimmick. There are multiple beach scenes, and Elle and Noah also, at multiple points in the series, go to their own little secret spot, which is the Hollywood sign. Like, they go to the Hollywood sign. Now, this was immediately a little weird to me, because from BoJack Horseman, I seem to remember the Hollywood sign, or the Hollywood sign in that case, not having, like, a parking lot near it or anything. So I looked up, like, how you could get to the actual, like, sign close enough to touch it, which they did. And it turns out you're not allowed to. That's not a problem, of course. I'm sure people do all the time. To get to the sign requires a 3-hour hike in which you climb up over 1,000 feet. And Elle and Noah just, like, show up here, like, on a whim. It makes absolutely no sense. They don't appear to have brought any hiking gear, or to be, like, out of breath, or to have brought any water, even. I think the writers just, like, literally didn't check how easy it was to get to the Hollywood sign. And they assumed that kids just, like, kind of went there, like, for a few minutes in between classes. There's also this weird thing where Noah's family is super wealthy, and I mean, like, they have Parasite House. Like, that's the level of wealth we're talking about. Which is fine, it's not like the actual classism of The Edge of 17 or something, but it is bad in the sense that it literally creates a plot hole, which is that they could easily, and would, considering their family history,
our moms were BFFs before people even used the term BFF,
pay for Elle's college. Here's where I'll actually get into the premise of the second movie. Now, Elle's boyfriend, Noah, you remember Noah, he's the rape apologist from part 1, he goes to Harvard. Now, for some reason, he keeps saying that he goes to college in Boston, which is just literally not true. Harvard is in Cambridge, but, close enough. It's near Boston. So he's like, hey, Elle, you should come to Boston. You should go to one of the many colleges in Boston. Now, this would be one thing, except that Elle already knows what college she wanted to go to, which is UC Berkeley. Why did she want to go to UC Berkeley? Well, because of her and Lee. Now, her and Lee, when they were very little, and we've been told this from the very beginning, created these rules for their friendship, cute little 6-year-old rules that they made when they were 6, such as, like, don't fuck members of each other's families. Sixth grade stuff, And one of those rules was, we are going to go to the same college, and that college has always been agreed to be UC Berkeley. In fact, they take this rule very seriously, because when Lee finds a brochure of another college in Elle's stuff, he, like, flips out, and she has to apologize, even though it's like, was she only supposed to apply to UC Berkeley? Like, what if she doesn't get in? UC Berkeley has a 17.1 acceptance rate. It would be stupid to only apply to UC Berkeley. Anyway, so there's this conflict. Elle's sexist boyfriend is going to college in Boston, but Elle's sexist best friend is going to college in California. So it's like, where does she go? Well, she decides to apply to both. But the issue is, now she lives in California. They live in California. UC Berkeley is pretty cheap for in-state tuition. Now, it's not cheap, but it's cheap as colleges go. And Harvard, on the other hand, is not. Harvard is very expensive. So if she wants to be able to go to Harvard, assuming she even gets in, she has to figure out a way to pay for it. Now, her family can't afford Harvard, especially because she's got a little brother who we only see twice, and one of the times is when he's gawking at how fuckable his sister looks in her prom dress.
Wait.
Anyway, somehow she has to get the money. Her friend's family, for some reason, is unwilling to pay, even though they're like the Bezoses. So she sees this flyer for a Dance Dance Revolution contest. Now, it's not actually Dance Dance Revolution for legal purposes, but like it's Dance Dance Revolution. And the prize money for winning this contest is $50,000. I will repeat that. The prize money for a Dance Dance Revolution contest is $50,000. Not only is that an insanely high amount of money to offer to the winner of a Dance Dance Revolution contest, it also wouldn't even help, because it wouldn't even cover, I think, a single year of Harvard tuition. But it's framed as, like, the way that she can pay for Harvard. So, I guess we're just supposed to accept that. Now, lucky for her, she's a master at Dance Dance Revolution. Now, some wacky hijinks ensue. I won't bore you with the details, but, you know, she wins the contest, because of course she does. But I want to talk about the contest itself. So her and Marco do this really impressive, fancy routine. Marco is her dance partner. I'm just very confused about how this contest works, because this is a Dance Dance Revolution contest in which people are dancing with a lot of creativity and style. So my question is, like, which is it? Dance Dance Revolution and the knockoff game that exists in the movie, because we're shown the end screen. It has an accuracy score based on whether or not you hit the right tiles at the right time. So if the contest is based off of the score, then it doesn't make any sense that Marco would be doing backflips and stuff, because that greatly increases his chance of fucking up and making their score lower. But if it's all about the style, then, like, why even have the contest be Dance Dance Revolution, right? If this is just about style, why not just have, like, a dance contest? Though that's a thing, you know. Like, people do that. It's actually more of a thing. I had a great time watching The Kissing Booth, but that's really only because I was video chatting with a friend and we were making fun of it the whole time, and any movie is fun when you watch it like that. So there's one final question we have to answer, and it's, would The Kissing Booth succeed, if not as a romantic comedy, then as a reflexive comedy? And the answer, I think, is no. Great reflexive comedies like The Room or Love on a Leash, they're funny even when you watch them alone, and I know because I have watched them alone and they were still funny. But The Kissing Booth, I don't know, if I watched that alone, I'm pretty sure it would just be depressing. Now, why is that? Why is it that some movies with stilted dialogue and unrealistic characters and ridiculous storylines, why is it that some of them are masterpieces like The Room and others aren't, like The Kissing Booth? What is the actual difference between them? It's impossible to really answer that question, but we can understand it, in the same way that we understand Tarantino's movies. Now, Quentin Tarantino is perhaps the most influential working screenwriter, and he's pretty big with, like, film bros. So because of that, a lot of aspiring screenwriters try to write like Quentin Tarantino does. And there's a running joke where, like, no one can. It's impossible to write like Tarantino unless you're Tarantino, and sometimes he can't even do it. But, like, why is that? Like, if you did a side-by-side comparison of, like, the Pulp Fiction Royale with cheese scene and some coffee shop screenwriter's scene that is heavily inspired by it, it would be impossible to, like, accurately pinpoint the reason that Tarantino's scene is so much better, and yet it clearly is. Tarantino has just sort of found this music to his dialogue that is kind of impossible to replicate and even understand. I'm sure he doesn't even totally understand it, but everyone who watches Pulp Fiction knows that it's there. In the same way, it's possible to pinpoint the exact reason that The Kissing Booth fails where The Room succeeds. The Room, Birdemic, Troll 2, Love on a Leash, they've all found a music to their supposed badness that brings out a lot of comedy, and it's impossible to say exactly why The Kissing Booth doesn't have it, but it just doesn't. All this to say, the kissing booth, bad.